Hi, I'm Jonathan. I'm in our studio in Dumbo, Brooklyn. I'm back just recently from a trip to Japan, to Tokyo, and I hadn't been to Japan in a long time. And I was very excited to go because I wanted to explore some things that are central to what we do. And it was a really amazing trip, and I have to thank the people at Audio Technica who made that happen. Now, Audio Technica makes the world's best phono cartridge, in my opinion. It's actually what's on our K3 turntable back there. It's the MC 2022. And when that came out, I was really impressed. I wasn't surprised. They had already made what I considered to be the best mid-level cartridge, the ART 1000. And what's really interesting about this company is they made the world's best cartridges at the entry level. But I didn't realize the extent of Audio Technica's analog, you know, web. And they came here earlier this year, and I don't know, they experienced something here and said to me, would you like to come to Japan? We'd like to talk with you about creating some kind of listening thing, event, place. I said, well, yeah, of course, I would really love that. And I hope that we get to visit a bunch of the Kissa. You may have heard of Jazz Kissa. Kissa is a very specifically Japanese phenomenon, and it could be translated as a listening bar. And this opens up into a whole really interesting conversation about listening bars, and about the difference between Japanese culture and American culture, about listening and records, all sorts of things. But I jumped at the chance to do this, and big shout out to Matsu and the whole team at Audio Technica who took such incredibly good care of me over the course of my week in Tokyo. I had no idea what I was stepping into, and it was actually really just magical because I didn't know the extent of what Audio Technica was really doing, but that they had sponsored what is really the most important attempt to document and in a sense preserve these jazz or these kissa, because they're not all about jazz. The first kissa actually were classical music. So let's discuss what these Japanese listening bars are. Kissa is short for Kissa-ten, which would be like a tea or coffee place. And that's because at the very beginning, about 100 years ago, the first one of these places is called the Lion. And I've got some imagery, video, footage of these places, including the Lion, which we'll put up on our media, our social media. But the way this started is that right before World War II, the records and the equipment necessary to play 78s were obviously big, extremely expensive, hard to come by, and in Tokyo and other big cities in Japan, a lot of the places that were doing these, playing these things, if I understand this correctly from the people who were my hosts, they were actually alcoholic places and a bit louche. Tokyo has pretty remarkable nightlife, and I think there's still 4 areas in Tokyo that are legally set aside that you can practice the sex trade in. So there was a countervailing thing amongst the Japanese that people established listening bars, well, listening places, Kissa-ten, where they would serve coffee, tea, other beverages. In fact, I think all the places I went to served everything. But these these places were really about listening to the music. In the beginning, it was classical music, and then after World War II, when the GIs who were occupying Japan left, they left behind not only audio equipment, but records and their music, and you had this new jazz music which came in and really blew minds in Japan. And these records, you can imagine, after the devastation of World War II, desperately poor population, but also desperately curious and interested in what was going on in the world, and this music was a real phenomenon. And places sprouted up where the owner would create a space. Typically, it would feel like you were going into somebody's, house or living room, and the audio equipment was often hand built by the owner, and the owner would be playing the records that he or she really loved for the guests, who would typically be consuming a tea or a coffee or a piece of cake or something like this, and that was the exchange. But really, the guest was coming in to hear this music, which was not available otherwise. It's not affordable. The equipment, not something that people would have in a Japanese home. And the master, the proprietor, the owner, would perform the giving part. And this relationship of a giving and receiving thing is something I'd like to come back to, because it's very central to what a kissa is, whether it's a jazz kissa, a rock kissa, a classical kissa, a listening bar. But it's a relationship which, honestly, I did not fully understand myself until this recent trip. So let me back up where my personal sort of involvement on this comes in. For 5 years, and I haven't discussed this, but I've been actively working on my own listening space project. That's outside of what we make with Ome and Fleetwood Sound. I recognized a real need before this explosion of interest in the quote-unquote listening bars all over the United States, in Europe too, that what we do should be in a place. Actually, I conceived it more as a restaurant than a bar, and I was pretty prescient about that. Come back to that as well. And I wanted to do this, and then I watched this explosion of places in New York City, in Berlin, in London. Some of the people in those places came to see me because, they were doing projects like this, for example, in London. And, I then went to experience as many of these places as I could out of curiosity, and to see if they were on the same track as me. And what I found was definitely not the same track. Because this explosion in the listening bar scene here and elsewhere in the West, it really has coincided with the interest in vinyl, in records. And the explosion in vinyl obviously makes me very happy, because we make like that. Many people consider K3 to be the world's best turntable, K5 turntable, the turntables that we make plinth systems for. I've been very seriously involved with vinyl as my primary or only source for the music that we run through our loudspeakers for well over 20 years. Back when it was completely unfashionable. And the first audio shows I did, like Rocky Mountain in 2008, there were like, 1 or 2 turntables in the entire show. You go to an audio show like Munich these days, there's a turntable in every room, and in most of the rooms, they're not playing. This is really interesting. At audio shows. So they have a turntable, and maybe it's spinning, and maybe the needle's on it, but you're not hearing the music. So what are they doing with the turntable? Well, the turntable is now a universal status symbol. It's a symbol that you're cool. And even for audiophiles who consider it to be super uncool, digital is cool, now they've changed their minds. But for a lot of people who are not audiophiles in Western culture, the record has become a shibboleth. And by the way, that's a great word. You should look up what it means. But it's not just a symbol. It's a symbol that gains you entrance into a certain kind of culture, society, an in-group. And I've watched how records are being used, I'm not unhappy about it, but somewhat cynically, to market anything. You'll see a record or record player in the background of a fashion shoot, of a television show, whatever. Record's cool, and so having, a place that's playing records, that's a bar, that sounds like, wow, win, 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 right? You've got the records, you've got the record players, that's all cool. People love to drink, socialize. This seems to be a great formula. And you've seen places opening up all over the place. The only problem is that it's all wrong. That approach is completely wrong. And I needed to go to Japan to really understand this. And in Japan, I got it really, really fast. So let me back up. I get to Tokyo as the guest of Audio-Technica, who are the makers of the world's best cartridges. They're the biggest cartridge maker. They're the biggest turntable maker. They make some of the world's best microphones and have for a really long time, and the same for headphones. And I said that they're probably the biggest turntable maker in the world, and the biggest audio company in Japan that's just making audio. And they're an analog company. And they understand the value of analog in a world that is rapidly becoming digital, such that your headphone won't be connected anymore to your phone. Your headphone will be connected to the cloud. And at that point, it'll be a digital device which will be controllable only by a chip, an AI chip, a noise-canceling chip, made by one of the 2, 3, 4 huge companies in the world that control all this. And so the monopolistic tendency of capitalism gets ever more shrunk and concentrated in the hands of people who you don't want it to have that power. On the other hand, there's analog, and the resurgence of interest in vinyl has no concentration of power behind it at all. If you think about it, it's pretty remarkable, because there was no force, there was no economic, no corporate or any other conglomerated force pushing the agenda of vinyl. It was people saying, this is how I want to experience music. So where is the problem with the listening bar situation, such that I got the download when I got to Japan? My hosts introduced me to a remarkable journalist and scholar of the Kissa culture, Nick Dwyer, who's a Kiwi who's been living in Japan for a really long time, has devoted his entire life to music journalism, and has been engaged for, I think, about the last 10 years on a project of documenting the Kissa culture, not in the most extensive way, although he's been to hundreds of Kissas throughout Japan. And there's well over 1,000 of these places. There used to be several thousand of them in Japan, but there's at least 1,000, Nick tells me. And Nick, with the help, the backing of Audio-Technica, has engaged on a project called A Century of Sound, which is an episodic documentary project on, at least initially, 6 really iconic Kissa of different types, starting with the Lion, which was created in 1927. It's a classical music venue. and sort of a range of other musical genres and types. And Nick personally escorted me through these places and actually a whole bunch more, introduced me to the owners, to the history, the background. And it was a real revelation because I only understood Kissa through some publications that I own, some books that show pretty bad pictures of these places with no one in them, because the way they documented them was to remove the customers, which was a complete mistake. And I would look at the sound systems in these places because, you know, look, that's what I do. I build sound systems. So I'm also somewhat of an expert on vintage audio equipment. So I can look at the equipment in any of these pictures and immediately know, okay, that's it. That JBL has those drivers in it, that turntable. I can kind of like understand what it's going to sound like in my head. And you know what? That was a really lame way to approach this phenomenon, because it doesn't have anything to do with that. And I started to understand that as soon as Nick started to take me into place after place after place. And I stepped through the door and I got it. You know, I got the vibe. And it really, you know, affected me, because I started to understand not just what was sort of going on there, but like a whole lot about, you know, where kind of capitalism that we live in, that we've created, you know, what it's done to us, difference between Japanese, deep Japanese culture and American culture. Each one of these places had such an extremely powerful feeling of care and actually, I just have to use this word, love. That the people who were running these places, sometimes it was the people who founded it. Sometimes it was people who wanted to keep it going, in the case of the Lion. But the word love is, you know, it's a big word. I'm not talking about romantic love or sexual, sensual love. I'm talking about the love of wanting to share maybe the most important thing in your life with someone else at a really deep, high level. And I realized pretty quickly that this in itself was an enormously differentiating factor to what we've got going on here in the West with these listening bars. Because from the giving side of these Kissa, what I experienced was the proprietors having an intense interest in their guests, in how their guests were feeling, in sharing what their expertise of the music and of the genre is. And the music was always extremely interesting or affecting. And there was never a lapse of any length of time between one thing that was playing and the next. And oftentimes I'd be like, this is just amazing, amazing music that is being played. You know, floor to ceiling record collections. You could tell from the spines of the records how often the records were pulled in and pushed out. People knowing exactly where the records were and putting on things in this beautiful flow. Here, when I go to listening bars, most of the time there's nothing playing. Stuff's playing from a playlist. There's just no care. If something is playing, it's a record, half the time it's what some sort of like Williamsburg hipster thinks, is super cool because they pulled it out of a crate someplace and they want to show off. I'm talking about where music, like Japanese food at its best, which is amazingly impressive, has a degree of harmony and integrity, And this was just unfailing wherever we went. Not to mention the way, you would watch the proprietor prepare the drink that you were making, they were making for you, and the care that went into that. That's on the giving side. But here's the real clincher on the receiving side. These places were all pretty much full when I went into them. Whether the people were Japanese, there's some foreigners in some of these places, total respect, total silence. The people were coming to listen. That means not just hearing the music, but paying attention to the music, not multitasking, really listening, like raptly, or in a reverie, a deep state. It's so beautiful to see this. They appreciated being in this other reality. Each one of these places is so idiosyncratic. None of this stuff is Instagrammable. It's not going to be on Pinterest or any of that shit. This is all real. You can feel like this is somebody's, like you stepped into somebody's living room. This would be considered impossible, like that's too personal. In Japan, it doesn't work that way. Here it's called authentic as opposed to plastic. But this exchange that was happening between the people who were receiving and the people who were giving resulted in a union that was like, you just feel it. It was just, I was like, why can't we have anything like this here? I'd like to do that. But here, there just is no care about anything. The audio equipment, and I know because, I'm in the business and I know who supplies the audio equipment to the other places. It's cynically purchased because, that's in all the Supreme stores, so we're going to have that. I've gone into like the biggest place here in Brooklyn and probably the biggest listening space in the United States when it first opened. The owners invited me. I said, you really need to put some acoustic treatment in here because the reverberation, and I said, I could just tell you what to do. It will cost you only a few $100s. Totally ignored me. Even that is like, because they don't care. Because all that matters is, look how much money we're making. Look how many people are in here. They look like they're having fun. So what do we need to change anything for? And you know what? They're right. They don't. But, that is just bullshit. If you want to actually, refer back to what the origin, the OG of this all is. And having experienced it just recently, I can tell you, it's really sad that we don't have this. But I can't blame it all on the proprietor side, right? In fact, the hard news here is that you could have a place that has this ethos, that has this vibe. What you also have to have are the people to go to be the patrons, to be the clientele of such a place, who will shut the fuck up and show respect, and more importantly, actually want to listen. And this is a problem because when you pair alcohol, with a bar with this, it's not going to work. I can tell you why it's not going to work. Because when you go out to a bar as an American, as a European, you want to drink. When you drink, you get somewhat or very drunk. You raise your voice and you want to communicate for the most part. And so you want to talk. And that does not work with listening. And that's a big part of why Kissa were not alcoholic bars per se. So for this to all work in the West and in America, you need people who were willing to go into such an establishment to respectfully receive what's being given, which is to listen. And I'm not sure whether people here are ready for that, to be honest. I mean, I'm going to find out to some extent. That's probably why I didn't really think that a bar was a good idea for doing an OMA hospitality project, that a restaurant might work better. But even that is inherently somewhat of a noisy idea. Big problem that we have is that we don't have a culture that knows how to listen anymore. We don't listen to music. We just have it on in the background everywhere. We don't listen to each other, which is why we have the politics that we do right now. Election day is in 2 days. And we don't listen to ourselves, which is why we are diseased, morbidly obese, and extremely unhappy. We're not listening. So, if you're wondering what's the real takeaway from all this, what's the meaning, I would say that until people learn how to listen, they're not going to even be able to appreciate what these Japanese-style listening bars or spaces offer. And that's a shame, but at least, I've said it. It's a hard thing to say, because it's a really deep problem. But at least, hopefully, this may start some kind of process within you or conversation about, where we're at with one of the most basic attributes of being alive and a human being, which is the ability to listen.